Tonight, I'm showing you my black walnut bench. This bench was designed to highlight some amazing wood grain and still be very functional. After finding just the right black walnut boards at my local hardwood store, I planed them all down to 1 1/4 inch thick. This makes it thick enough to be strong but not so heavy that the bench can't be moved. After cutting these to length, I chose my 3 favorite boards and squared up one edge on the joiner. This edge was then placed right against the fence of my table saw and ripped to my desired width. With all 3 boards cut to the exact same size, they were ready for glue up. To assist in aligning the glue up and to add strength, I added some biscuits along the length of each joint. I did this using a new biscuit joiner, which I plan on doing a full review of very soon. The boards were glued up and clamped overnight. After scraping off the dried glue the next day, I smoothed out any variations in the surface with a number 5 hand plane and a sander, and then cut off the ends of the entire assembly. For the lower shelf, this was made out of 3/4 inch black walnut and built in the same way as the top. I also used the bandsaw to cut the corners out of the shelf so it would wrap around the legs. This was cleaned up with a chisel. The legs and skirts of this bench were eventually going to be painted white, so I just decided to use Douglas fir. I planed down the 4x4s and 2x4s to the thickness I wanted and then cut them to length using my miter saw. In order to make the bench more interesting, I decided to have some fun with the joinery. The 4 posts were cut at the top using a tenon cutting jig that I had built previously using some plans from Matthias Wandel. If you don't have one of these, there are other ways to make these cuts, but it really helped, especially since I was too lazy to set up my dado blade. Of course, after cutting 1 or 2 posts like this, I thought, this would go a lot faster with my dado blade. Oh well. This meant I had to make more cuts, but hey, there were only 4 posts. At the bottom of the posts, I wanted to have a support where the shelf would rest, so I cut out a notch to hold a crossbar which would connect the 2 posts at either end of the bench. To cut these, I drilled out most of the material and then cleaned up the rest with a chisel. After cutting the skirts out of Douglas fir, I cut a notch in both ends of each board. These notches, together with the slots cut out of the 4 posts, make up the components of what many people call a castle joint, because the posts kind of look like a castle tower. With a bit of glue and a couple good whacks with a mallet, this is a solid joint that won't come apart. Once the base structure was assembled, I brought it out to be painted. Since this was a small assembly, I just painted it with a few coats of rattle cans, or spray paint, and 2 coats of lacquer. Painting wood is never my preference, but the compromise I made with my wife was half painted and half wood grain. The top and shelf were finished with Osmo Pollux oil. This was my first time using this finish, and so far I'm impressed with everything, except for the price. This leaves a gorgeous finish that really highlights the wood, not the finish. It's also supposed to be water resistant and easily repairable, but it's definitely not cheap. I guess you get what you pay for. In order to allow for wood expansion, I secured the bench top with tabletop fasteners. You want to install these with some room to move across the grain, but they can be fairly tight when they're in line with the grain. The lower shelf was installed with 2 screws towards the center of the shelf. This shelf is narrower, so I'm not as worried about expansion across just a 6-inch width. But I did leave about a 1/16 of an inch of expansion room on either end before it would hit the posts. The final bench is solid and sturdy, and I love how the black walnut grain came out on top. If you like this video and you want to see more, hit like and subscribe to get all the updates of whatever new projects I'm working on. And see you next time.